To lead, he must stop time itself. Will history forget me? The crown was already above his head when the new king raised one hand and told the drummers to stop. Everything in the square froze. The old women holding calabashes froze. The chiefs beneath their bright umbrellas froze. Even the praise singer stopped in the middle of a word. 500 people were gathered in the royal courtyard that morning, all waiting to see Prince Tade become king. The white ram had been blessed. The bronze stool had been brought out. The river water had already touched his hands. Only one thing remained: the crown. But Prince Tade did not bow his head for it. He stood there in deep blue aso-oke, looked across the crowd, and said in a voice clear enough to reach even the last person by the outer wall, "Before any crown touches my head, bring me the girl they have hidden, the one you call cursed. I will hear her name first." You could feel the shock move through that courtyard like wind through dry leaves. Because a coronation is not the kind of ceremony a man interrupts. A prince can delay a feast. He can cancel a dance. He can even dismiss a chief. But once the crown is raised, the day belongs to tradition, not to one man. And yet there he stood, refusing a kingdom until somebody found a servant girl nobody important had spoken to in years. Her name was Abeni, though in that compound where she lived, very few people still used it. They called her the cursed one, the shadow child, the girl whose footsteps brought bad luck. Now listen carefully, because stories like this do not begin in palaces. They begin in backyards, in kitchens, in places where smoke stings your eyes and nobody notices whether you have eaten. Abeni was 17 when people began calling her cursed out loud, and 20 when the king stopped his own coronation for her. Her mother had died the week she was born. Her father, a quiet palm wine tapper named Sanya, had loved her anyway. He raised her with rough hands and gentle patience. When the other children laughed and said she had brought death into the house, he would lift her chin and say, "A child is not a curse because grief arrived beside her." But fathers do not live forever. When Abeni was 12, Sanya fell from a palm tree before sunrise and broke his neck in the red earth below. That was the day her aunt, Iya Morenike, came into the house not weeping, but calculating. There was a room, there was land, there were cooking pots, there was a goat, and there was one thin girl who had nobody left to speak for her. Iya Morenike was her father's elder cousin, and she came with her daughter, Bolanle, and a voice so full of sorrow that the neighbors praised her before sunset. "Who else will care for the child?" she said. People nodded. People blessed her. People went home. By the end of that month, the front room belonged to Morenike. The goat belonged to Bolanle. The better wrappers were gone, and Abeni had moved to the lean-to behind the kitchen, where the smoke slept in the roof. Now, let me say something important. Cruelty is not always loud. Sometimes it does not beat you. Sometimes it does not scream. Sometimes it simply arranges your life so thoroughly that after a while, even you begin to wonder whether you deserve it. Morenike was that kind of cruel. She fed Abeni last. She clothed her in what nobody wanted. She sent her to fetch water before dawn and pound yam after dark. And when visitors came, she kept the girl out of sight, saying, "The child has an unsettled spirit. Best not to have her before guests." Bolanle, her daughter, grew soft where Abeni grew hard. Bolanle wore coral beads to market. Abeni carried firewood. Bolanle learned songs. Abeni learned silence. Within 5 years, whole stretches of that town had forgotten the girl existed. If this kind of story angers you already, stay with me. Because the day this turned around, it turned around so completely that people in that kingdom were still speaking of it long after every person in this story had gone to dust. It happened at the end of the long rains. That evening, the sky had darkened too quickly. The market women were already packing their tomatoes into baskets when Morenike discovered that one sack of dried cassava had been left in the old dye shed beyond the stream. It was the kind of mistake a reasonable person would fix in the morning. Morenike was not a reasonable person. "Abeni," she said, "go and bring it." The girl looked at the sky. "Auntie, rain is coming." "Then run faster." "It will be dark before I return." "Are you advising me now?" Abeni lowered her eyes. "No, Mama." She took the rope basket and started down the path alone. The old dye shed stood near the stream where indigo makers worked in the dry season, though now it was mostly empty. Few people went there after dusk. The ground dipped low, floodwater gathered, and the path curved around a cluster of iroko trees that had acquired all the usual village stories. Spirits, voices, bad luck. By the time Abeni reached the stream, rain was slashing sideways through the trees. That was when she saw the horse. It was a magnificent animal, black and restless, one rein dragging in the mud. No rider. Anybody sensible would have kept walking. Abeni did not. She followed the broken line of hoofprints and found a man half under a fallen branch near the bank, breathing hard through clenched teeth. He was young. His travel robe was expensive, even under mud. One side of his forehead was cut, and his left leg was trapped badly enough that his face changed when he tried to move it. For 1 second she thought of robbers, for another, of spirits. And then she heard him mutter, not to her, but to himself, stand up, you fool." That is when she knew he was only a man. She pushed the branch aside with both hands. It took her 3 tries. The rain was turning the ground beneath them to paste. When his leg came free, he tried to rise and nearly fell into the stream. "You must not move," she said. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Then I should kindly drown where I am?" "There is a shed," she said. "Can you lean on me?" He looked at her once, perhaps measuring how little she was beside him, and said, "No." "Good," Abeni replied. "Then we will try anyway." Later, much later, when he told this part himself, people laughed at that line. But what he remembered most was not the rain, not the pain, not the shame of needing help. It was that a girl with nothing in the world had spoken to him without fear. She got him to the dye shed by stubbornness more than strength. Inside, the place smelled of wet wood, old ash, and indigo. The roof leaked in 3 places. There was one broken bench, a clay pot, and a bundle of dry raffia tucked in the corner. Abeni used the raffia and her flint to coax a little fire to life. The stranger watched her for a long time. "You came here for work," he said finally, glancing at the empty rope basket. "And now you are trapped with a burden heavier than cassava." "You are talking," she said. "That means you are not dying yet." He almost smiled. Rain hammered the roof. Night thickened. The stream rose so loudly they could no longer hear the road. He asked if she had family. She said, "Enough." He asked whether someone would come looking for her. She said, "No one who matters." He asked whether the people in her town would be afraid if they knew she was sheltering a strange man at night. This time, Abeni did smile, though there was no joy in it. "They are already afraid of me," she said. He turned his head. Why? Because my mother died, my father died, the goat once died, and a baby had fever in the same week I walked past his mother's door. That is enough for some people. He stared at her. Rainwater slid from his jaw to his collar. And you believe that? No, she said. But when a lie feeds a house, people protect it. Not long after that, his shivering began. That frightened her more than the injury had. There was no blanket in the shed, no wrapper spare except the one around her shoulders, no medicine except a little dried scent leaf in the corner of her basket. She crushed the leaves with water, laid them on his cut, and when the cold got worse, she did the only thing she could think of. Around her right ankle she wore one small brass bell on a leather cord. It had belonged to her mother. The second bell had broken years ago. This one she kept because it was the last thing in the world that had once touched her mother's skin. Abeni untied the cord, wrapped the leather around his wrist to keep the leaf poultice in place, and dropped the bell into his palm. "If you faint," she said, "shake this before you disappear fully. I will hear it." He looked at the bell as though she had handed him gold. "This is yours." "So is my life," she said, "and I am still using it to help you." He went quiet after that. Somewhere near midnight, when the storm was at its worst, he asked her one more question. "What is your name?" Abeni poked the fire with a stick and said, "Sleep. I asked your name. And I answered your need," she said. "That is enough for tonight." He gave up after that, though not, as you will see, forever. Just before dawn, riders arrived. Abeni heard them before he did, the frantic chopping of hooves, men shouting through the wet gray morning, someone calling, "My prince!" Prince. That was the moment everything changed, though Abeni did not know it yet. The man in the shed was Prince Tade, only son of the old king, traveling back from the western farms after dismissing his escort in temper and trying to ride ahead alone through weather no sane person would challenge. His guards found him half-conscious, one wrist tied with cheap leather, one brass bell clenched in his hand. He was lifted, wrapped, and carried away in minutes. One man tried to press silver into Abeni's hand. She stepped back. Another said, "The palace will reward." But Morenike's voice had already started living in her head. "Do not be seen. Do not be noticed. Nothing good comes to girls like you." So Abeni picked up her empty basket and walked home before the sun was fully up. When Morenike saw the missing cassava and the mud on her legs, she slapped the back of her head and called her useless till noon. Abeni said nothing. What would she say? Use one continuous single-speaker narration only, with Bradford's adult British male storyteller voice. Deliver this as dramatic, cinematic storytelling, with a slightly fast reading pace, minimal pauses, and no unnecessary silence between sentences. Do not use any other narrator or speaker. Keep the narration flowing naturally while preserving the exact story text and all dialogue. Story text. That she had spent the night in a dye shed, keeping a prince alive with smoke, leaves, and stubbornness. People would have laughed in her face. Now, if you were listening from somewhere in Africa, or anywhere at all, tell me in the comments what town or country you are hearing this from, because stories travel farther than people think, and this one travelled all the way to a Coronation Square. Prince Tade was laid up for 6 weeks. During those weeks, he spoke often of 2 things: the courage of the unnamed girl, and the sentence she had said, "When a lie feeds a house, people protect it." He repeated it so often that the Queen Mother asked whether the medicine had affected his mind. When he could walk again, though not without pain, he sent his oldest palace steward, Baba Fadeyi, to search the towns east of the streamlands. Not for beauty, not for a noble daughter, not for a chief's child. For a young woman who lived under a lie, who had been called cursed, and whose mother's bell was missing from her ankle. That search might have succeeded quickly if goodness were always met by more goodness. Instead, Baba Fadeyi made the mistake careful men often make. He asked the most respectable woman first, and in that town, that woman was Morenike. She welcomed him with kola nut. She lowered her voice at the right moments. She praised the palace. And when he described a poor girl near the stream who no longer wore the bell from one ankle, Morenike understood everything before he finished breathing. The palace wanted Abeni, not Bolanle, not some merchant's daughter, Abeni. For one sharp second, envy moved through her so fiercely it nearly showed on her face. Then she smiled and said, "Ah, no. There is no such girl here, only village rumors and silly children." Baba Fadeyi asked elsewhere, but people see only what power allows them to see. Abeni had been hidden for so long that no description fixed her in anybody's mind. The old steward left with nothing. That same evening, Morenike did two things. First, she forbade Abeni from going beyond the compound gate without permission. Second, she bought Bolanle a new brass anklet. Months passed. Then the old king died, and with mourning came preparation for the coronation of Prince Tade. The kingdom stirred like a pot set back on fire. Chiefs arrived, families boasted, rumors flew. Then came the announcement that made every ambitious mother in 3 districts lose sleep. The new king, after coronation, would publicly name the woman he intended to marry. Morenike nearly stopped breathing from greed. She had one advantage nobody else had. She knew why the king's men had once searched that town. She knew the story. She knew the road, the storm, the hidden girl. And worst of all, she knew the king had not seen Abeni clearly enough to identify her by face alone. So she dressed Bolanle in brighter cloth, taught her a gentler laugh, fed her lines to memorize. And when coronation week came, she locked Abeni in the smoke room behind the kitchen before dawn. Not the grain room, not the storehouse, the smoke room. A low, dark place where fish were dried in season, and tears came to your eyes after 10 minutes. Abeni was sent in to fetch firewood kindling. The door shut behind her. Then came the sound of the iron hook dropping into place. She stood very still. No shouting, no warning, no explanation. Only Bolanle's laughter somewhere in the yard and the faint beginning of drums from the palace road. After a while, Abeni sat on the floor and leaned her head against the wall, blackened by years of smoke. Outside, the whole town was dressing for history. Inside, the girl they called cursed was breathing old ash. By mid-morning, the royal courtyard was full. Chiefs in embroidered agbadas, elders in white, women in wrappers stiff with starch, boys climbing walls for a better view. Prince Tade came forward to receive the rites, and when the time came for the crown, he looked over the crowd once and saw Bolanle. Beautifully dressed, lowered eyes, new brass anklet, a lie wrapped in expensive cloth. He understood immediately that someone had tried to answer his search with ambition instead of truth. So when the high chief lifted the crown, Tade raised his hand. And you already know what he said. "Before any crown touches my head, bring me the girl they have hidden. The one you call cursed. I will hear her name first." The square erupted. Morenike pressed a hand to her chest and cried, "Kabiesi, there is no such person!" Tade turned toward her voice. "Then why did you tell my steward the same lie months ago?" Silence. He held up something small between finger and thumb. A brass bell. Dull now, worn smooth by years of touch. "The woman I seek left me this in a storm," he said. "Not to claim reward. To keep a stranger alive until dawn." The person who answers for her today will finish the sentence she spoke to me in the dye shed. Bolanle's lips parted. Nothing came out. He waited. Then he said, "A lie feeds a house when—" Bolanle began to shake. Her mother whispered harshly from behind her. The girl tried once, failed, tried again, and then, to her credit, she did one decent thing in her whole life. She fell to her knees and said, "It was not me." The gasp that rose from the crowd was so loud, even the drummers looked frightened. "It was not me," Bolanle said again, crying now. "I never went to the stream. I never saw the dye shed. My mother said if I kept quiet, everything could still belong to us." People turned, not toward the prince, toward Morenike. But the truth was not finished. From the side of the square came the small voice of a palace errand boy who had been sent to deliver cola to the back compounds earlier that morning. "My lord," he said, "there is a girl locked in a smoke room behind that woman's kitchen. I heard her coughing." You could feel the whole courtyard harden. Chiefs did not walk. They surged. Men, women, guards, drummers, elders, the whole crowd moved like floodwater through Morenike's compound. Baba Fadeyi reached the door first and tore the hook free. When Abeni stepped out, blinking in the sunlight, there was black ash along one cheek and smoke caught in her hair. She was wearing the plainest wrapper in the yard. Her eyes were red. Her hands smelled of charcoal. And for one long second, she did not understand why half the kingdom was staring at her. Prince Tade came forward slowly. He opened his hand. The brass bell lay in his palm. Her breath caught. He looked at her not as a servant, not as a rumor, not as a curse, but as a human being whose absence had stood in his path for months. Then he said, quietly enough that the nearest people had to lean in, "Finish the sentence." Abeni looked from the bell to his face, and because truth does not need rehearsal, she answered at once. "When a lie feeds a house," she said, "people protect it, even when it is choking them." The silence after that was not confusion. It was recognition. Tade closed his hand around the bell. "What is your name?" he asked. Not girl, not servant, not cursed one. Your name. Abeni swallowed. "Abeni, daughter of Sanya." He nodded once, as though something inside him had come home. Then, before chiefs and market women and children and drummers and the woman who had tried to erase her, Prince Tade turned to the high chief and said, "Now you may crown me. A kingdom that will not speak the name of its poorest daughter has no right to call any man king." People remembered that sentence for generations. Morenike tried to fall at Abeni's feet, tried to explain, tried to say hardship had made her harsh. Abeni did not move. "Keep the room," she said. "Keep the pots. Keep every small thing you bent yourself crooked trying to protect. What you cannot keep now is the lie." Then she looked at Bolanle, who was still kneeling and crying. "You may stand," Abeni said. "Truth has already punished you enough for one morning." That surprised people most of all. Not that she had been wronged, not that she had been found, but that once she finally held power over those who had crushed her, she did not become them. Prince Tade was crowned that day, not before the truth, after it. And before the next planting season, Abeni entered the palace through the front gate, not carrying water, not hiding her face, not shrinking from footsteps behind her. Years later, when people asked why King Tade's court became known as the place where even the poorest widow could bring a complaint and be heard, he would point to the queen beside him and say, "Because I once nearly ruled a people who had mistaken neglect for order." And Abeni, when asked why she insisted every servant in the palace be called by name, always answered the same way. "Because the first theft is not of land or cloth. The first theft is making a person feel they can disappear." Morenike lived long enough to see children in that town stop using the word cursed for every girl grief had touched. Bolanle married a trader and, by all accounts, became kinder than her mother ever was. As for the brass bell, Abeni had it sewn onto a new ankle cord and wore it only on days when judgment was being given in the women's court, so that nobody there would forget what it means when a woman with nothing still chooses mercy. And that is the part I want you to carry away from this story. A curse is often just the name cruel people give to someone they want erased. But names return. Truth returns. And the good you do in a dark place, when there is no witness and no reward in sight, has a strange way of walking ahead of you into your future. If this story reached you, type name in the comments. And if you know someone who has been overlooked, spoken over, or treated like they do not matter, share this with them. Because sometimes the miracle is not that a crown is delayed. It is that, at last, somebody asks the forgotten person her name first.